Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Dr. Jerry Poje. Poje,
yes.
And we are going to be talking about affordable housing, but more than that. We're going to be talking about the life cycle of housing. We're going to be talking about how housing is the first consideration for almost every other issue we're trying to manage here in Fairfax County. So thank you so much, Jerry, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me,
So
Catherine.
you serve on two very important organizations.
So I serve currently in my second term on the Human Services Council, where we seek to recommend budget priorities to the boards of supervisors on how to conduct our resources for county staff and for nonprofit organizations to meet the human services need of the 1.1 million people in our very diverse Fairfax County. But secondarily, I also serve on the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, which is now confronting one of the most sizable decision points for our county. Are we going to seize our future to be better and brighter, or are we going to retreat into something that will cause a downward economic spiral in Fairfax County?
So when we talk about affordable housing, what we're really saying is that we have to have various types of housing that are affordable to a spectrum of people
Yes.
in the economy.
So let me give you an example. I'm currently 66 years old. My wife will be embarrassed to have me admit that.
But she's 10 years younger, so why would she care?
She is much younger. If I had to look at my own life, I lived for my youth with my parents and 5 other siblings in a single family residence. When I went to college and I graduated, I aspired to have an efficiency apartment that I could rent with a roommate and be able to make my way in the world. Making my way in the world meant that eventually I found my spouse, the love of my life. We lived together until we could afford to get a single family house to raise our one child. As we reach this age in life, we're looking to not be encumbered with the same property. We want to live in the same community, but we'd like to have a smaller unit that we could live a more temperate and smaller life as befits 2 people of our age.
So you live in Vienna, I live in Fairfax City.
Right.
And so each of us is looking at our community saying, where is the housing for people like us, empty nesters?
Unfortunately, in Vienna, almost every home being built is a $1 million McMansion. Now, while that may be an attractive housing stock for a certain age and stage in life, it's not the housing stock that I would have needed as a newly graduated child from college or as a senior looking to stay in my community where I do so much important volunteer work, but in a more temperate-sized housing stock.
So the developers who bring projects to the county, you know, whether it's rental apartments or it's condos or it's townhouses, you know, we talk about mixed-use development has become the really hot thing. You look at Tyson's Corner, you look at the Mosaic District, and it's like, oh, it's mixed-use housing. But anything that's constructed new, where the land is very expensive, is not going to be affordable housing.
So let me give you an example. Fairfax County, with its 1.1 million diverse people, is 31,000 affordable rental units short. 1/3 of our population is totally dependent upon rental units. Because we have not built those 31,000 rental units, the marketplace has not solved this problem. We need to begin to think, how would we have a complex, proportional plan that the business community, faith communities, and the government starts to work together to solve that problem? Because we're so short on those affordable rental units, the price for rent has increased to almost $1,800 per month. Do you know how much of a salary you would need to earn in order to be able to afford that? $70,000 per year. You know what the average retail worker makes? Less than $30,000. So even if they were a couple, 2 retail workers working in the Mosaic District would not be able to afford a rental unit in the Mosaic unit. If you can't afford that, the way people accommodate is by shrinking on health care, shrinking on high-quality food, shrinking on letting their children have all the development that they need, which is,
Right.
access to better schools, access to better experiences to raise that child to be the most productive they could. We're in a crisis, and we've got to solve this. This is our time to reach out and solve this problem.
So to bring it home, and this is where I think, activists, grassroots activists, really need to understand better what the problem is. Because when we say affordable housing, a lot of people immediately go to the people. For instance, I sit on the board of Bright Paths. We work with the working families who are struggling in Fairfax County. They're working very hard, but housing is too expensive here. And so people kind of automatically go to, that's who we're talking about. Like, in their mind, affordable housing serves this population of people, but that is so untrue. Affordable housing is the issue, I would argue, for the majority of the people who live in this county, the majority. That means students, that means the newly married, that means the newly senior. That means people who've moved here from somewhere else, like Flint, Michigan, for instance. It's the majority of people who are going, we cannot afford the housing in this county.
So let me give you one example. At one of the highest end services that we provide as a county are the services provided through the Community Services Board. They meet the challenges of those who suffer from mental health crisis, from addictive problems, people who have the most urgent needs. The new director of that department, Tisha Deegan, she migrated here from Flint, Michigan, to Fairfax. Flint is a noteworthy community, suffering from all the wrong reasons. But Tisha brought the best that she could offer into being a national leader in community service board work. We wanted to attract her, but how difficult is it for her as the #1 in one of these most important social service organizations to be able to reside in this county when she's trying to come in from Flint, Michigan, because our prices are unbelievable. Give you a second example. The love of our life, my wife and myself, is our daughter. She graduated just 2 years ago from Boston University as a budding young geophysicist. She could not move into our county, even though there were some budding young geophysicist jobs, because she did not want to graduate back to her own childhood bedroom.
Right.
I don't blame her.
I don't either.
She's living in Tucson, Arizona. Our county is weaker because that young talent hasn't come back into our community. We're raising children in our community that can't afford to move back into it. And that's not people who are living in poverty. These are middle-class people, middle-class values with high-end potential for making Fairfax County even better. And we're losing them.
I agree. And when we talk about workforce development, which a lot of people talk about a lot of the time, and I'll just call out Senator Mark Warner, who talks about the gig economy and the people, and the challenges of having portable benefits. But a lot of times when you talk about strengthening the workforce in Virginia through education, I rarely hear housing mentioned as part of that equation, that formula for bringing the best and the brightest into the county or keeping them in the county, because you're right. People working inside the companies that are moving here still can't afford to live here. Right. And so sometimes we call that workforce housing, but again, I think when we use terms like affordable housing or workforce housing, people conjure up, or images are conjured up that may just be a stereotype. And stereotypes, it's not that they're incomplete. I mean, it's not that they're untrue, they're incomplete. Yeah, workforce housing might be nurses and teachers and firefighters, they're the ones but they're also the mid-level managers, they're also IT programmers.
Yep.
They're also budding geophysicists.
Let me give you another crucial report that tells us we've got to do things better and differently than we've done in the past. In 2015, the county executed a very important new development plan for economic success. And within that plan, we recognized that we now have a sizable break in recruiting high-end corporations to set up their headquarters in Fairfax County. And the reason isn't because we don't have housing for the chief executive officer or the chief financial officer or for all the vice presidents. We don't have housing for all of the other support people who are essential for that corporation's success. They're looking at our county not because our schools aren't good enough. They are, and we would welcome people coming in and using that service. It's not because our police and fire aren't sufficient. We've got great police and great fire. What we don't have is the very housing for people who are starting out at introductory levels and working their way up through corporate structures. So that's a threat to our economic development as a county, and a new strategic plan for affordable and accessible housing is going to be the solution.
And part of that is going to be looking at types of housing, you know, and we're talking about communities that don't necessarily want high density housing, but a lot of apartment buildings benefit from being high density. It keeps the prices lower. It's also about putting density of housing where people need it, which is close to transportation. And that's the other conversation that I'm not hearing about how our transportation grid affects where housing is built and what it costs.
So we know right now what are the most highly traveled roadways in Fairfax County. We know where the new transportation corridors are being built on our way back towards Dulles Airport.
Right.
We're going to have some very important new metro stations. It's transforming the Tysons area, and it'll transform everything out to Dulles. We will be building up, which is what our future lies in as a 1.1 million person county. And it's the expectations that we have to create for ourselves, for our business community, for our faith communities, that we will build up in a way that makes sure there's a place for everybody to live, to work, and to play. It means we have to have the housing stock that guarantees that.
And I am right on that same page with you. And I just want to say, when we get back from this break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the cost of housing, the planning for housing, the strategic plan in Fairfax County, and how we can address the issue that housing is the problem we need to solve first. So please join us after this break.
Hey, did you know 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Let's go to theshelterpetproject.org and meet a few who are in a shelter near you. Harlow. Oh, she's one great listener who loves to hear all your stories. My kind of cat. Cerulo is a sweet, goofy boy who's eager to please. Sounds just like another dog I know. So go to theshelterpetproject.org, search your local shelters and rescues, and go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Dr. Jerry Poje, and we are talking about affordable housing here in Fairfax County. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Poje.
Thank you, Catherine.
So let's talk about the strategic plan.
So last year was recognized by our elected officials, the Board of Supervisors, that there really needed to be a much more aggressive plan of engagement on affordable and accessible housing. They sought and required from the Department of Housing and Community Development to come forward this year, 2017, with a new strategic plan. We're right in the midst of that activity. That's going to be a strategic plan that'll look at 3 5-year cycles. What are we going to get done in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years to meet this sizable challenge? Building enough housing stock that it satisfies everybody's needs to live, work, and play in Fairfax County. This is the challenge, and we're seeking broad public input into how that could work. We don't just mean what's the Department of Housing and Community Development going to do, but what are the innovative new partnerships among and between business communities, among and between faith communities, and in partnership with the county to solve this problem that is our link to a better, more prosperous future.
So let me throw this out at you, because I work a lot with nonprofits in this area, including the ARC of Northern Virginia and other agencies and organizations that are looking at supported housing, of which there also is inadequate supply, along with workforce housing and all of the other housing we've previously talked about. Young people being raised to be more independent, who are intellectually disabled, who are on the autism spectrum, who are suffering from mental illness or brain injury. There's even a mandate from the Department of Justice actually to put these people from institutions into our communities, but they need to be in supported housing. So who's advocating, or how does this need for supportive housing factor into something like the strategic plan?
So clearly we know that a portion of our 1.1 million people have differential needs than the rest of us. We estimate there are 70,000 people in our county who are struggling with disabilities of various sorts. They could be sensory disabilities, they could be mental health, developmental disabilities, they could be disabilities that occur through accident and injury. We need every one of those citizens to thrive in our county. Most of our audience will recognize a Nobel laureate, Dr. Stephen Hawking,
Right.
who is one of the most brilliant astrophysicists in the world. He brings in billions of dollars into the economy of the UK, and he stimulates thinking across the world. If we can't prepare our community to accept those people and let them thrive, we're denying ourselves that great potential for success. So yes, 70,000 people who are suffering from some forms of disabilities. That means that we have to build housing that isn't just available and affordable, but it has to be accessible.
So we're talking about universal design to a certain extent.
We're talking about universal designs that might actually solve my needs 10 years from now, right? So I'm in a senior situation, and I'm going only in one direction.
But let's talk about the fact that these don't have to be segregated communities. I really rail whenever I talk about housing that is senior friendly, with people talking, they go immediately to assisted living or adult communities. Well, most of us don't want to live, I don't want to live in a segregated community.
60 years ago, we learned the poverty of segregated housing. We learned that ghettos are terrible places to raise children and to thrive. We want to build inclusive, diverse communities wherever we live, because guess what? Our children thrive best if they're exposed to the global diversity that is currently part of our heritage here in Fairfax County.
And that includes being around people who are older. Why do we want to shuffle older people off out of sight?
Our children need to understand they will get older. Some of them are quite insistent upon being treated as adults, but they don't understand yet why becoming an adult is something that all of us should plan and be prepared for. We have 90,000 seniors in our county that are in some form of urgent need for housing.
Right.
That is a mark of our society's success as to how we treat those who are other abled than what we might feel in our youth and in our middle agehood.
So how are all of these voices going to be represented? So you've set the table and you've invited people to come sit around the table, but some voices are louder and stronger than others. Especially we were talking about Innova and the new development of the Innova campus where the old ExxonMobil used to be. You know, that's an 800-pound gorilla. They're going to create a lot of jobs going forward.
That's a terrific place to think about how we could develop a new business model of dealing with housing. So for example, the Translational Medicine Institute is attracting the best and the brightest to think about how we're going to deal with this new genetically engineered and modified form of medicine. Well, guess what? To build that institute, you're going to need to attract the best and the brightest, but also all of the technical staff.
Support staff, right.
The support staff that will need to work on them. Locating in that corridor right along Gallows Road is one of the most transportation-rich areas that we have. That sizable piece of property that used to be the ExxonMobil property is ideally suited for thinking through something very different than what Innova has ever had to think about, is how am I going to ensure the housing of the people that work in the hospital or would work in the new laboratories? If we make room for them to live in that area, guess what? They're going to be on call in an emergency if ever there needs be one. They will be raising their children with higher degrees of satisfaction. Their loyalty to the company, to the hospital, to the community will grow measurably. We need to start that discussion right now in 2017.
Let me throw out an example. Lisa Sturdivant actually used this as an example, and that's Masonvale. Right. Masonvale is right on the campus of George Mason University, and it was built for faculty that they wanted to attract who are coming from places like Flint, Michigan, who I can teach here, but I can't afford to bring my family. Right. And so there's a 2-year period where they have access to the housing at Masonvale as a transitional way. And these are very much educated, PhD people that we want in the county.
We want people with those skill sets to be resident in our county. We want them to be resident in our county with this special support system until they graduate on their own by their own economic largesse to populating the rest of the county.
So do you
landscape.
see this is an example of something that Innova could look at doing, or other large companies?
Clearly it's an example for which there are many models out there. It will be a break on the development of Fairfax Innova in their core facilities, not just their central facilities, but all of the regional facilities, if we don't figure out the housing. Everybody has a stake in this aspect of our development. It's a new aspect of business development that the board and the executives need to come to grips with. I think it could be done in ways that is supported by Fairfax County, because guess what? Fairfax County also needs positions in such affordable housing units for the short amount of time it would take to mature teachers, firefighters, policemen, or for other county services. We need to rethink how we build our capital investment in schools. What's the problem with not building additional floor space above the school that we could gift to new teachers, to new bus drivers, to new people dealing with facility maintenance, such that they would get a 5-year benefit of living above the school and doing the services that need be until they themselves are economically situated to move into the regular housing that we have around the country. We need to be more innovative.
Innovation.
We can be.
Yes.
We can be.
I think innovation really is the key. We have to stop thinking about how it's always been done and think about how it's never been done.
I can give you one more example. My own faith community 12 years ago began to partner with Facets in doing hypothermia sheltering. For 1 week out of the winter time, we brought in people from the streets, gave them a warm meal, a warm place to stay, friendly faces, made sure people were taken care of. When we calculated what our 12 years worth of investment was, it was over $1 million worth of volunteer hours and physical goods. We're now asking ourselves as a faith community, would we want to continue this for another 12 years, or would we want to transfer our time, energy, and resources into partnering with other faith communities to make sure the housing stock actually got built so that people would graduate directly into an affordable dwelling unit, and they could then steady themselves on the ground, have better economic opportunity, and graduate themselves into the open employment and open housing stock in our county.
Isn't there a model in other places? I want to say Salt Lake City, Utah?
Salt Lake City is a clear example. We see it happening around us across the country. It's time for us to harvest those best models and see what would fit with our unique geography, our unique economy. We have to tailor everything to our own needs, but we should be looking right now with an innovation idea. How are we going to bring the best innovative models to bear in Fairfax County for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years, and for the next 15 years?
So as we close on this, give us some web resources. How can people get involved? Where can they find information? How can they engage?
So there's 3 sources that I would love for everybody to become familiar with. One is this economic success plan for the county. The second is the Human Services Council worked with county staff to do a human needs assessment. We've got to see the projection of where our community lies at this moment and how are we going to meet those needs. And the third is to begin to think about the One Fairfax resolution passed by the board last summer that says we're going to develop policies that work through a social and racial equity lens. So we're making sure everybody rises and has the potential for rising. We have good plans for the Housing and Community Development Department on how to communicate the housing needs. I'll share them with the staff, and we can make sure they're on this website as well.
That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate you being here, Jerry. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us. I agree with you, housing first. And that is something that you need to know. So thanks for joining us on this broadcast of Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we will see you next time.